I honestly wish that couples therapy didn't have that stigma of kind of it's the last resort. And I actually think it should be the first resort. There is hope. You know, we really were about to divorce. We were about to separate. We were there and we clawed it back. And I don't think you hear that story very often. And I'm not saying we've got the perfect relationship now, but it is possible, even when you feel like it's done, that maybe there is another route. And I think if that's what I can share, then I'm here for that.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheri Jacobson, and this is Therapy Lab, a podcast dedicated to demystifying therapy, mental health, and the art of well-being. In this episode, we are joined by blogger, mom, and business owner Kat Sims to talk about her personal experiences. So hello, Kat.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
A warm welcome.
Thank you. What a gorgeous place you've got here as well.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good right now. It's I think it's one of those things that is a constant flux. You're never perfect, and you're never, you know, it's kind of, you always have to know that when you're good, that there might be a time when you dip. But right now I'm doing really, really well.
Yeah. And what keeps you busy? What are you working on?
Well, I have lots. So I have obviously my blog, Not So Smug Now, which is, I guess it started off very much as a parenting blog when I was in the throes of postnatal depression. I just wanted to be the voice that sort of said, it's okay to not be enjoying it. It's okay to be struggling. Whether or not you've got postnatal depression, actually, it's still okay to find it really, really hard. And now it's turned into, I think as my kids have got older, I've naturally moved away a little bit from the parenting side of things and talk a lot more about relationships, and especially how having kids and the pressures of real life can affect your relationship and your marriage, partnership. So I've got that. And then I also have an agency, Hustle and Fox, which is all about empowering those people that don't necessarily feel that they have access to the business knowledge and networks, maybe because they feel like they're lacking in confidence after having kids, or they're single parents, or for whatever reason. And we do what we can to kind of open those doors to them and help them get that access to knowledge and networks. Yeah.
So what's a typical day like for you?
Oh, I'm self-employed. There's no typical day. Yeah. Sometimes I crave routine. Sometimes I wake up and go, God, I wish I just had to set my alarm, get up, go to work, come back, pick the kids up. But actually, I guess a typical day is really depressingly wake up, check my social media. I try to get that out of the way in one go. Try and get the kind of the replies and the posting and all of that done so that I can chill out for the day, but it never quite happens. And then it's breakfast and kids, get them to school, gym, in my office, and then whatever the evening holds. Normally kids and shouting about fish fingers, and I've given them the wrong colour plate, and all of those usual parenting things.
And so the Not So Smug blog started off as initially postnatal depression.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time I was undiagnosed. So I'd had a fairly, I say a traumatic birth. I mean, I know people had far more, but for me, it really packed a punch. And I was very type A, very like, if you want to do well at something, you just have to work really hard and that will be fine. And of course, parenting and birth it didn't fit my kind of parameters of how to succeed. And it really threw me off. And I think the trauma of the birth led to me being it led to a really difficult breastfeeding period filled with a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety. And that in turn just sent me down this sort of spiral. I'd had depression beforehand, so I don't know whether there's a predisposition to it or not. But it sent me down this spiral, and my husband's a touring musician, so he was around for the first month, which was great, and so many women don't get that. And then he was gone for the next 7, backwards and forwards here and there, but generally gone. And I really, really struggled. And I found that everything made me feel more isolated. So I'd go to parenting, like baby groups, and everybody would just be talking about the miracle and how wonderful it was and I was like, I just want to put her out by the bins. Like, that's how I felt. It's like, I just want to be done. I haven't thought this through. This is not what I expected. And because I'd had depression before, I think I thought that I would have recognized postnatal depression. I think it was like, I know the signs, I know that. But with this, I didn't. I think I just thought, well, I've had a new baby, so of course I'm down, of course I'm exhausted, of course I'm not sleeping. This is just what having a new baby feels like. And it really wasn't until Billy turned 1, maybe past 1, that I remember going to the doctors, I guess for just a checkup or something, and just crumbling and completely breaking down. And the doctor sort of said, I have been concerned. You had a really rocky start. You seem to be holding it together, but I don't think that's the case. And I think we need to start diagnosing this as postnatal depression and treating it accordingly. And I think because of my past experience with depression, I was kind of open to that. It didn't really show. I was like, oh, that explains, okay, now I get it. It explains so much. And actually, a lot of what I talk about is people fear that kind of going to the doctors and fear that diagnosis. But actually, in my experience, every time I've had that diagnosis, it's been a relief because it's answered questions. I've gone, okay, there's something wrong with me that can be fixed, rather than there's something wrong with me that I absolutely can't talk about. So that's my very long-winded answer to where Not So Smug Now came from. But at the time, I just wanted to say what I was feeling and say that it was okay to say you were struggling, that it wasn't this magical time, this, you'll never feel love like it. I was like, I really didn't feel that overwhelming sense of unconditional love for probably quite a long time. I think, I would have died for her. If a bus had gone to, I would have jumped in front of the bus. I would have, died that on an instinctive basis. But if I'm really honest, I couldn't say to you that for that first year I felt that overwhelming love. I felt a disconnect, a definite gap that I couldn't bridge.
And was the writing therapeutic for you? Was it cathartic?
Hugely cathartic, because you could say, I could write things that I couldn't say, not really because I think there's sort of a distance with social media and with the internet and with the blog that allows you to be a little bit more honest and open. And I can cross all sorts of sort of TMI boundaries on social media in a way that I feel completely comfortable with. But if I had to have that same conversation with a really good friend, it would probably be much more difficult. And so for sure it was cathartic. And then when people responded, and hearing people go, thank you for saying that, I feel the same way and I never knew it and I don't know how to talk about it, that just made me realise, a lot of people sort of say thank you, but actually it's quite a selfish act for me, because it helps me feel better to know that other people feel the same way as well. So that was definitely a reason. It was kind of my therapy before therapy, I guess.
And have you always been a writer?
Yes, it's always been. I did copywriting, and every kind of iteration, I was an English teacher for a long time, so every iteration of my kind of working life has been around words and writing and creativity. So the blog was a natural fit, and this was before Instagram, and it was before any of that. And I remember posting that first post and just putting it on Facebook. And I think probably within 24 hours it had 3,000 views. And now I only had 400 or 500 friends on Facebook. So that was really traveling quickly for the first time I'd ever written anything. And that was my outlet. And even now on Instagram, the captions are kind of where I exist more comfortably.
So diagnosis of depression, or officially PND?
Officially PND,
depression.
Yeah.
And that was with a GP?
Yes.
Okay. And then what tools did you have in place, or what did the GP suggest then?
So I was really lucky. I had a wonderful female GP who, I know you're supposed to have 10-minute appointments, but often I would be in there for 40 minutes just sobbing. She did recommend kind of medication therapy and talking therapy. And I will be honest, I took the meds and didn't do the talking therapy because I had a baby and a husband who was away, and no help because my family were all over the place. So the reality of me being able to get to therapy on a regular basis was nigh on impossible at that time. So I took the meds, which I'd done before with previous episodes of depression, and really, having had that diagnosis, really knew that I needed to really look after myself in a way that I probably hadn't been doing before. So I did reach out to my family and say, this is the situation. They really stepped up, came to help me out, asked for help, essentially. Made sure I got more sleep, made sure I got more exercise, and did the meds. All of that was fine. But after a while, I started to realise that the postnatal depression and that first year, had had such a damaging effect, not just on me, but on my relationship with Billy, my eldest, but also with my husband. And I would say that when we probably didn't fully recognise the impact that year had had until maybe 18 months ago. Because obviously the focus was on my relationship with Billy and the kids. Let's get that right, let's work on that. And actually we just sort of in front of our very eyes, it just corroded us as a couple because so much resentment built up between us. And in that first year, I remember Jimmy would come home from tour and he would know how much I was struggling. And he did what he thought was absolutely the right thing. And I guess what I thought was the right thing at the time, which was to take the baby and go off with her. And that was great because I needed time, but it created a real divide between us. And they had this bond that was just unbreakable, and still they're kind of telepathic, him and Billy. And I think he felt like he really needed to protect her because, and this is the story I was telling myself, he needed to protect her because I wasn't capable and that I needed, and that I was disappointing him because I wasn't the mother that he thought that I could be or should be. And it made me feel more isolated. And it wasn't his fault. He did exactly what he thought was the right thing and what I wanted him to do. But the impact was that we really resented each other. And I resented his relationship with her. I resented the fact that he really looked after her. And in taking her, thinking he was looking after me, I actually just felt quite abandoned and neglected. I didn't feel like he wasn't, he wasn't looking after me. He didn't go, how are you, what can I do for you? He just took her and went. And it was just, we weren't communicating properly. And that led to a real downfall. And of course, he was away so much as well. So it just festered really silently until we got to a point where I just went, I just don't think that you love me and I don't think that I love you. And we've never really recovered since having the kids. And that was I guess that really blindsided me because I've been so focused on the effect my PND had on me, had on my relationship with Billy, and I didn't even for a second consider it would have such a negative effect on my marriage as well.
Where did you go from there?
Well, we'd been in therapy for a little while. We'd probably been in therapy for a couple of years by the time I went, I'm done, it's not working. But I'll be honest, I definitely cheated at therapy. And people always laugh when I say that. But because when we were in couples therapy, and Jimmy is very open to, I'm not great at being vulnerable, and he is great at being vulnerable. And he's great at taking the responsibility. He's really good at owning his shit in a way that I'm definitely not great at. And for 2 years, I let him do it. I sat in the therapy sessions and let it be about him and his issues and all of that. And I just couldn't get to a point where I recognized that I had to take responsibility as well. And after we had this conversation, he said, I don't want this to end. And I said, well, we have to now start being honest, and I have to start being honest. And I have to say to you that right now, I don't love you. And I think you need to tell me the same, because we're faking it and it's not getting us anywhere. And so we did that, and for 3 weeks we didn't really talk probably longer, unless we were in therapy. And I started to be really honest, and that was when I got it, when everybody went, therapy's really, it can be really ugly and hard, and it's painful. Before I'd been going, well, this is just great. It's an hour where I can chat about stuff. And now therapy was really hard. And I think that was the turning point, when we weren't just turning up to therapy, we were actually really, really working it. And that meant that it was ugly at home. We really only talked for the sake of the kids. And our therapist was really great. And I think we were really lucky, because we'd done 2 years with her. So we had a basis. She wasn't completely new. I think probably she also knew that I hadn't really been fully committing. It's sneaky like that, those therapists. And that was the first time I felt like actually we had a chance. We could work through this.
Who initiated the therapy in the first instance?
Jimmy. He's been very open to therapy and all sorts of kind of different treatments that he's worked through for his own anxiety and things like that. So he was the one that initiated it. And I wasn't resistant to it, but I also went in going, which I actually get a lot of people telling me as well. I went in going, well, the issues are with, like, he's the crazy one. He's the one with all the crazy issues. And while that is, was true to a certain extent, I also was in denial about my own crazy issues too. And interestingly, that's something I get a lot of now, people saying, well, I'm trying to get my husband to go, but he says I'm the one that needs the therapy.
Yeah.
And I sort of say, well, that may be true, but if your marriage needs therapy, then you both need to be there, because your marriage is both of yours. And the two aren't the same. Because you can work on yourself and do all of that. It doesn't mean necessarily that your marriage is going to get any better. So it was a real tough learning curve for me. And I had to get rid of a lot of defenses and this kind of northern, I'm fine. Everybody else is mental, that kind of thing. And it wasn't easy, and it was really hard.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of Therapy Lab. If you feel ready to transform your life with therapy, we're offering 10% off a first session with any therapist on harleytherapy.com to our listeners. Just use the code TherapyLab when you book your session on harleytherapy.com. And are you still in couples therapy?
Yes, and you know what? I think we always will be. To a certain extent, with varying different degrees. I honestly wish that couples therapy didn't have that stigma of kind of, it's the last resort. And I actually think it should be the first resort. I'd rather go to therapy. I mean, if for whatever reason it didn't work out with Jimmy and I entered into a new relationship, one of my deal breakers would be, we need to be in therapy from the start. Like, at least make sure we've got some stuff settled down, lined up, that we know we're on the same page, because it's like an MOT for your relationship. And there are times I walk into therapy and I go, do you know what, we've been fine, and I don't know why we're here, and other things to be doing. And often they're the ones where I'm blindsided by something. And I walk out and I go, oh, that was really good. I really needed that. So yes, I think we are. And sometimes we change it up. If it's bad, we'll be in there every week. If not, we can reduce it to every couple of weeks, or we haven't quite got to the once a month or anything like that. But it's something that I'm really open to. And I think for us, it works.
And again, a little unusual in the sense that a lot of therapists work in a traditional weekly format.
So we're really fortunate.
Seems flexible.
Well, she has to be, because of course Jimmy's away so much. So we've done Skype therapy with her as well. So when Jimmy's in wherever he is, Brazil, doing shows and things, we can still fit therapy in. And she's also been really sensitive to our financial needs as well. So at times when we're both self-employed, so obviously it's feast or famine, you never know what's coming in when. those times when it's been famine, she's either reduced the price for us or been very happy to make it once every 2 weeks. And I think that comes from us having a very long-standing relationship with her. So I think she probably is a little bit more flexible with us than she normally would be. But for us, it's really worked, and it's been a lifesaver because we just couldn't commit to being able to turn up every single week. It's just not feasible for us.
How does the configuration work for online therapy? Because you and Jimmy may not be in the same location.
Yeah, so we'll just use Skype for the three of us, and with 3 little windows,
Dial in.
and we'll all chat. And it is a different vibe, and our therapist also has an office sort of local to us, one in London Bridge. And I think at one point I said, well, we could come to London Bridge. And she said, no, we're not introducing another location. She's like, we already have 2 with Skype and here. She's like, I'd rather keep the locations to a minimum. And I thought that was really interesting that, you know, she wanted consistency, because when we did go to Skype, I do remember it being a different, you know, it was a different situation that we had to get used to. But we're very, very lucky to have her. And I've recommended her to lots of people, so hopefully.
It seems you put in the work as well. But in addition to discussing your issues in the personal, in the private therapy space, you are also very open about the nature of your relationship online on as well. Instagram, you'll post sort of cataloging the ups and downs that you're going through. What's it like being so open?
I think for me, I've been doing it for so long that it goes back to the idea it's actually quite cathartic. It's quite therapeutic for me. But I also just have always felt that it's really important that we talk about these things that people don't talk about. And mental health was one of them. I think now it's great. There are so many conversations going on about it. People are becoming way more open. It's not carrying quite the same stigma, or I think there are certain more acceptable versions of mental health. You know, I think we're happy to talk about anxiety and depression. They've kind of almost become buzzwords, but I think that's still helpful to a certain extent. But I want to talk about those things that people don't talk about. And very few people are talking about the fact that their marriage is hard. And maybe girlfriends will do it over wine, but I find that in my experience has always turned out to kind of be a big complaining session, and how and I've done it. They never, you know, they'll put dirty dishes on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher, and how, you know, and I just feel so unappreciated, and all of those feelings are valid, but I just don't think they're helpful conversations, because we all just sit there and pat each other on the back and go, it's so hard and men are rubbish and why do we even have to live with them? So I wanted to have a different conversation that kind of allowed for me to take responsibility for the things that I do, because, you know, it's not really in their nature, but if all our husbands got together and, you know, complained about us, they'd all have the same stories to tell, and they'd be really legitimate and valid. So it isn't just us that are struggling, it's the guys too. And I felt I had to start talking about what I was messing up in the relationship. Because the narrative of how, you know, men are just such a nightmare was just getting boring. So it was really important to me to be open about that. And I had to really balance it with Jimmy, because he's completely the opposite. He's rarely on Instagram unless it's about a bass guitar. Couldn't care less about anything like that. And I remember writing my first post about the relationship probably about 4 or 5, 6 months ago, and showing it to him. And I said, don't worry, I'm not going to post it, but I just thought you could read it. And he went, you should post it, actually. I was like, really? And he said, because I think it's important. You know, now that we're in a much stronger place, I can see that this journey is something that we could be talked about. So I posted it, and it got a hugely positive response. And so Jimmy's now very okay with me talking about this stuff. I do still, if I think something might be a little bit tricky, I run it past him. But I'm never, when I talk about the relationship, I never go, Jimmy did this and Jimmy did that, and then we had an argument about this, and he said this. It's never that specific. It's very much about general issues that we come up against daily. And I think it's really resonated with a lot of people. And so while that happens, I'll keep doing it.
Yeah. And aside from therapy, obviously a core component of your relationship well-being, what else do you find helps the two of you as a couple?
Communication. And that isn't something that naturally came easily. It didn't come easily to us. We work a lot on communicating in various different ways. And I think, a lot of that is the tools we've been given. But we give ourselves time to sit down, and we both had to put in boundaries with the kids. And Jimmy would very much sometimes struggle to kind of say no to the kids while we were having a conversation, or, to prioritize us when the kids were around. So we worked really, really hard on him. He's worked really, really hard on that. And I've worked really hard on being more present. Because for me, I'm on social media a lot. It's very easy to slip into this kind of absent connection with your phone all the time. So the two of us have worked on that. And the other thing is just finding time for us as a couple. And it sounds so cliched, and to a certain extent it is. But we, for the first time in September, Jimmy turned 40, and I booked a trip to New York for the two of us. And my eldest is 6.5 now. And that was the first time we'd been away together for more than one night without the kids since we'd had children. And that was really hard for Jimmy. We're very different like that. Jimmy is very much wants to make sure, is very conscious of how the kids respond to us not being there. Whereas I'm very comfortable with leaving them, I guess because I was left a lot as a kid. So it's finding that balance. But we went to New York, and as soon as we got there, he was just like, this is the best thing we could have done. And so we committed to doing that at least once or twice a year, just taking ourselves off for at least 2 nights. And also one of the things our therapist said to us, which has been the biggest kind of touchstone for us, is this idea of being kept in mind. And there were so many years where I didn't feel kept in mind, and him too. And so just having that phrase when we're butting heads is so useful. I can say, do you know what? At the end of it, I didn't feel kept in mind. And he can go, okay, I get it. And the same this way around. So sometimes just having the right language, taking time, and really, sometimes it's more important to make it right than to be right, which is really hard for me. It's really hard, but I really try and hold on to those things.
Also communication, you mentioned. Any examples of how your communication as a couple changed over time, and examples like?
We used to scream. Our fights were volatile, screaming. Never any violence or anything like that, but awful screaming, hurling insults at each other, just really trying to hurt, because we just couldn't find another plane to be on. So certainly we've worked really hard to not do that. And before, when he used to try and leave a fight, I used to go, don't you dare leave, because I just wanted to keep going. And now I've had to realise that leaving isn't him necessarily walking away from me, but just walking away from the situation and letting that happen. So yeah, I think we've worked really hard on making sure that we're talking about what's actually going on between us rather than what we think is going on, not screaming and shouting. And I had to read a book actually, which I read because I was losing my temper with my kids. And it really helped me in terms of losing my temper with Jimmy too. And it was called How Not to Lose Your Shit with Your Kids, which was fairly explanatory. But it was a really, really, really interesting book because it wasn't about managing the kids' behaviour at all. It was about recognising what that behaviour was doing to you and how the buttons that it was pushing and how you could avoid losing your temper. And essentially, her first piece of advice was do anything else. If you can do anything else except lose your temper, that's a great place to start. And I just translated that to my relationship with Jimmy because it was the same set of rules. So once I'd figured that out, I think it became a little bit more, we could communicate more calmly. And that was such a revelation because then we weren't saying awful things to each other. And that really helps if you're trying to love somebody and live with somebody. Not saying awful things to them is kind of a great place to start.
Yeah. So you've acquired a lot of different strategies and tools and communication as a couple. Anything that you've changed for yourself in your wellness journey?
I've learned to be really selfish about what I say yes to and what I don't say yes to. So really managing my time. Also recognizing how important it is that I look after myself and not be afraid to say, I need time. I need a morning or I need a couple of hours. And for Jimmy to recognise that as something that is a tool that makes me a better person rather than him resent me checking out. There was that kind of weird narrative going on too. So taking time for myself, learning to say no, asking for help, all of those things we hear all the time, but I really wasn't doing them. But we got help, you know, as I said before, we've got 2 kids. Jimmy works away a lot, so we had to figure out a way to get help with no family around. So we hired an au pair who's wonderful, and she teaches the kids French, and she does the pickups and the drop-offs, and we're there when they come back with dinner ready, so it's not eating into our bond with them, but it just takes the pressure off. And it also stops us having that awful fight, which is whose work is more important, which is the fight we had so much before we had any help. So things like that, just putting processes in place that allow us to kind of take that pressure off.
Yeah. And what's next on the cards for you?
Oh, I don't know. I wish I was a planner. I think I'm not one of those people that sits and plans lots of stuff in advance. Maybe I should be. But certainly when we know we're not having any more children, and I think that has been a really lovely place for us to get to, knowing that what we've got now is something we can build on, rather than knowing that at some point we're going to go right back to the beginning of the process. So knowing that we are done as a family has been really key for us. We've got really strong ideas about where we want to be in 5 years' time in terms of living and the things that we want to do. So for us, for the first time, we feel like we're working together on a shared plan, whereas before we had clear ideas of what we wanted, but they were quite separate. And I think we're just getting through each day and just making sure that we try not to mess it up too badly in the meantime.
That's a great goal and set of aspirations. Any final comments on where people can reach you and what you're looking for from your followers? Are you offering them a place to share or to take tips from you?
You can find me at Not So Smug Now on Instagram and notsosmugnow.com, which is where the blog is. I think I just want to be a place where people can go and feel like we're all the same. You know, it's not an aspirational blog. It's not somewhere where people can go and go, I want to be like that. It's like, oh no, that's me. You know, I'm shouting at my kids too. Or, you know, we haven't had sex in a month either because just kids. It's very honest. It's not about trying to be something that I'm not. I'll be there to, you know, show the worst bits of myself and also share the successes, but also just to say that you're not on your own and you're not the only one that feels lost or alone or unhappy in your marriage. And there is hope. You know, we really were about to divorce. We were about to separate. We were there and we clawed it back. And I don't think you hear that story very often. And I'm not saying we've got the perfect relationship now, but it is possible, even when you feel like it's done, that maybe there is another route. And I think if that's what I can share, then I'm here for that.
Yeah. Well, Kat, thank you so much for sharing with us here today. And I'm sure people will resonate with a lot of what you've been talking about. And all the best in your onward journey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Therapy Lab. To find private, affordable therapy in person around the UK or online by video from around the world, visit harleytherapy.com today to start therapy as soon as tomorrow. If this is your first listen to Therapy Lab, do hit subscribe to keep up to date with new episodes. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, and all good platforms.